Okay, well, hi Cathye and Gerald. Thanks for joining me today. I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to share. We'll just give it a minute or two. I can see a whole lot of participants arriving, and we'll give them a minute or so for the trickle to slow down, and then we'll get moving. Just as people are joining, it's worth pointing out that there are some useful links that will be posted by Carrie, our amazing facilitator, into chat that people can use. There will also be links to how you can join our community in terms of joining the Slack channel and things like that. So those things will all go into the chat. All right, wow, it's looks like it's going to be a festive time today. All right, well, let's go ahead and make a start. So I'm joined by Cathye and Gerald. We're going to be talking about what's new in 23C. In the meantime, we've just got a little bit of housekeeping that I need to do up front. Can we go to the next slide, please? So there are some helpful links. These are what I mentioned will be popped into the chat screen. While we're talking about this, just to make people aware, if you have a question, which I hope you do for Gerald and for Cathye, then please do put them in the Q&A area. Do not put them in the chat area. I'll be monitoring the Q&A, and we'll collect them up and do them at the end, unless one of the speakers, while they're not speaking, has a chance to answer them in the chat, in the Q&A chat. Next, please. So this TechCast is one of many. We have a lovely archive of very interesting topics on the website. You can go to our AnDOUC.org TechCasts, and what we're also interested in seeing is abstracts from your good selves. Anybody who's got interesting information to share with the community in respect of Oracle, database analytics, graph, spatial, we really want to have a look at them, and please do submit them. You can also get to that through this page. Just note what's coming up. We've got on November the 15th, we've got graph analytics for SQL developers, the new match clause, with Abby Giles-Haig and Jim Chaprinsky, two really fabulous speakers. We've had recently our favorite features of OAC, which was done on October 19th. You'll find those in the archives. So as you can see from the slide, it's a very active community. It's a place where you get non-standard technical knowledge. Anyway, next slide. So we've got merchandise. It's, again, this was all designed by our own Abby Giles-Haig, and there's some great merchandise. It's mainly available in the US. So otherwise, just come over and next slide. We'll see you at the summit in next year, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute. But sorry, it's my fault, Cathye.
No, you said it, so, the hands, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're doing fine. You're meant to know these thoughts by osmosis, you know that. Yes. So we have a lot of ways of connecting. If you, the website, we've already talked about. The Slack channel has become very active, and there's lots of people, including Oracle Product Management, who are on there. If you have a question or want to be part of an active community, Slack is a great way of communicating with us. We've got, obviously, the YouTube channel, which also has archives of all of these recordings. Today's session will be recorded. Obviously, our Twitter sign at Analytics and Data, Facebook and LinkedIn. So we do have a separate sort of subgroup for spatial and graph. Please note these links will all be pasted into the chat if they haven't already been. Next slide. So this is what I alluded to just now, and we are meeting in person again from April the 9th to the 11th, and that's at Redwood Shores in that building 300 area. We would really love to see you in person. We've got a massive amount of abstracts that have been submitted, which we're now evaluating. Some really incredible presentations. It looks like people have prepared for this, but there's nothing quite like being in person, and it's a very focused few days, lots of knowledge sharing. We have lots of Oracle product management, especially because of the location. It's right next to, it's in Redwood Shores itself.
Right there.
Yeah, right there. Yes, in the picture behind Gerald. So, yeah, we really do have access to a great bunch of people, and you get to rub shoulders with all those people that are sort of just in your imagination a lot of the year. So, right, next slide.
Yep.
Right, so it's your agenda. Just remains me to properly introduce Cathye and Gerald. And I'll start with Cathye because it's ladies first, and she's the customer. She's more important. Sorry, Gerald. But, so Cathye's Business Intelligence Program Manager at Rosendin, and she has 25 years of working experience with Oracle Business Intelligence and Analytics technologies. So she is, she's part of the furniture. She's been around that long. But I wanted to introduce you to her in a slightly different way. We have a fun fact about Cathye, and I think it's quite lovely. I'll leave her to talk more about it when she starts the presentation, but she was in fairly poor straits when she first got married, and a 10-year-old cousin overheard her saying that they didn't have much money, and he contributed and gave her some Christmas decorations, and that's now become an annual tradition for her and her family, where they make Christmas ornaments. So I'll leave that to her to expand on. And then Gerald, who insisted that he had no interesting facts about him, is actually a very interesting man. But first of all, he's a senior director of product management for Oracle. And he's come for a very technical background and still has a very technical mind. But he's also really advocating on how to build systems that provide flexibility to meet users' needs. And he's focusing on improving the developer experience of the Oracle database and the Oracle Cloud. So, and he's also very instrumental in helping drive the community. So, he's actually, for me, the top fun fact is that he's a Star Trek aficionado. He knows anything and everything about Star Trek. So when you come to question time, I expect at least one question about Star Trek. And the other thing is that he bakes bread. And this sort of started 3 years ago. And he has a 3-year-old starter sourdough kit, which he bakes bread from. So that is our presenters today. Oh, and I neglected to say who I was, although hopefully most of you do know. I'm Roger Cressy. I'm representing Bravantia in the USA now as an associate director. But my love and my passion is for this community, analytics and data Oracle user community. I work with a bunch of incredible people, including Kerry, who's facilitating this. You don't get to see her on picture because she's too shy. But with that, I'm going to hand over to you two, Cathye and Gerald. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for sharing today. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Let's go ahead, and I want to go ahead and get started with the agenda that we have, and basically what we're going to be going over today. First off, you're coming from me when you're getting it from both the user community as well as from product management, which hopefully you'll find that is a good mix. I actually went to, I think, one of Gerald's presentations at Global Leaders about the 23 new features the new features in the database 23. And I got excited about it. I thought, okay, I'm going to take this back to my team. And back in the summer, did a presentation internally to my team on some of the new features. I went and researched them. So I got really excited about it, and offered to then do a presentation as well, a TechCast, and Gerald volunteered to help me with it. So we're going to be going over this. We're going to be talking about some more key features that we have. We'll go over some analytic features as well. And then just some what I think are important for the everyday person using when they're using SQL, the everyday, the database is some of the nice to knows and some of the time savers that you may see coming out in the 23C release. Also, on the last slide that we'll have is some information on how to actually download a free copy of the Oracle Database 23C for developers. And it's something that you can go out in and actually test some of these key features that are coming out. This is also kind of hand in hand with another presentation that we're doing on the 15th that's going to talk about more of the operational property graphs that Abby's doing, that Roger mentioned earlier. So if you want to go more into the property graphs and things like that, Abby will be doing that later in a couple of weeks. Okay. With that, I will turn it over to Gerald.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Cathye. So yeah, well, hopefully we can make this interactive between Cathye and me, put some fun in there as well. So as Cathye said, we're going to go through some of these marquee features, but we deliberately did not cover property graphs in detail because, you know, Abby will be talking about that. So instead, we're trying to give you a well-rounded idea of just what's in 23C and the various different areas, so that when you see customers or you have any of these projects yourself, you go like, oh, gee, if I only could do this, you will find that as well. So let's jump right in. We don't have too much time. I'll start with JSON relational duality view, and let's just hop to the next slide, Cathye. This will be a quick walkthrough. This is probably it's definitely one of the three marquee features of 23C. It might be actually the marquee feature of 23C before we knew that the world is going AI. But what we're trying to do here is that we allow users to specify business objects, if you like, in the database, and these business objects being backed by JSON. So specifically, every database obviously has relational tables. Every database these days can do many things like JSON, XML, and so forth as well. But the relational model is still the general purpose model, right, that Cathye gave us, and has a lot of benefits. It's like all the other data models have a lot of benefits as well. But fast forward to the 2020s, every application wants to consume JSON structures, wants to send JSON structures. So we have always this impedance mismatch of mapping JSON to tables, and as said, like then databases started to add JSON support in the database, so storing JSON directly. But what JSON relational duality does is gives you this new concept of views that allow you to have the database from relational tables that you see on the left-hand side generate JSON directly. And if you send JSON to the database, it will go through the JSON and basically transforms it back into those tables and rows. So let's just see how this looks like. If we go to the next slide here, we will have the syntax. So there's a new construct, a new database object called a JSON relational duality view, or JSON duality view. You see here in the top left, it says create JSON duality view. And that view itself contains the structure of essentially the JSON document that you want to deal with. So you see here on the right-hand side, we have the student schedule, right, with student Jill and her major and the schedule for the classes. And you see on the left-hand side, this is GraphQL syntax that reflects that structure that you have on the right-hand side. Now, if you go to the next slide, we'll see what actually happens here is like, you see these names that are here in orange. Those are the actual relational tables that we're referring to. So we have a structure that starts, a hierarchical structure that starts with the student table and then traverses down to students, courses, teachers, etc. And there's a lot of little functionality that you can do there. We have like a teacher at the bottom there. You see like an add unnest. So that basically means don't create a sub object of that in the JSON, but pull out the teacher name into the higher level, and many more little things that we haven't plastered on the slides, but that allow you control, including modification control, so updatability, deletability, and so forth. If we go to the next slide here, you will see that what you have in each of these hierarchies are the actual column names. So, we started with as student, that's the student table. And then we say, okay, we want a student attribute in our JSON, and then colon. The column name in the table is actually STUID. So if the column was the same that you wanted in the JSON as in the database, then you wouldn't need this colon mapping. Then you would just say student ID, for example. But if the names are different in the table, then what you would expect this attribute in the JSON use this colon notation to rename them. So you see here, we mapped all these STUID, S name and major, to student name and major, and technically for major we wouldn't need it because it's actually the very same name in the column as well as in the JSON structure that we want to have. If we go to the next slide here, the important thing about JSON duality views is that they can be retrieved and modified via well-known document APIs. So I said before, like every application wants to use REST. Well, I said every application wants to use JSON documents, consume JSON documents, send JSON documents, and what's usually happening is like all of this goes via REST. So HTTP calls, put gets, etc. So like an application just wants to send off an HTTP call, the payload is this JSON document. And that's really the essence of what these applications try to do, keep everything stateless, everything organized in these hierarchical formats. So for JSON duality views to be also attractive to these applications and style of communication, it's imperative to have such a document API as well. And so this is exactly what we're doing. We actually allow you to have these REST API calls to the database directly. Oh, sorry, if you just go once back, Cathye, to the slide before. Yeah, no worries. So you see here on the left-hand side, you have a get call to the student schedule, which would be the JSON relational duality view, and then we basically use what's known as query by example to retrieve that. But on top of that, we of course give you SQL access, so you can just select them via SQL as well for the more traditional applications, or for the users, the end users, and you can also use it via the MongoDB API. Now, if we go to the next slide, which I've alluded to, so getting the documents is simple. That's actually something you could do for a long time, even by just using SQL JSON to generate JSON out of SQL. Where the magic really happens is when you update these documents, so sending them back. And this is where kind of like, other databases basically say, just store the JSON as is, or, the application has to deal with that. But what we do is actually, we also tell you, okay, you can either use SQL, the MongoDB API, or REST to send us this JSON document. And because the database has the mapping, this JSON duality view, the database will look through this JSON document and say, okay, I have to update the students table, I have to insert a new row in the course table, and so forth. And the important thing here is like the simplest approach of doing that would be like, we just update everything gets locked, and you just write everything from scratch new. That's sort of like what the kind of simplistic databases would do there. Oracle does not do that. We actually detect the changes on cell level, so literally on an attribute per row, and also, of course, throughout the different tables, and then only update these particular parts of the document. And to get this with full asset consistency, you get this with full durability, and you get this with this performance of what any other SQL update would look like or insert would look like in an Oracle database, rather than having to rewrite the whole structure. So this is super, super powerful, and that's sort of a secret sauce that neither ORMs can give you or document stores can give you. And then if you go to the next slide. Let's see.
Sorry.
There we go. Yeah, no worries. So just to round this up, it's like this has been extensively covered, by the way, in Juan Loaiza's keynote. So if you want to hear more about that, just rewatch that from Cloud World, Juan Loaiza's keynote. But the important thing about JSON duality views is that these JSON documents that are generated, that come out of the Oracle database, because it is an Oracle database, they can include any data. So not only just straightforward relational columns, they can have spatial data in them, they can have graph data in them, anything you can store in an Oracle database, you can essentially also expose via these JSON relational duality views into JSON documents. And the important thing here is that, unlike the traditional document stores that just store JSON after JSON after JSON, you see here in the middle, we have 2 times the schedule for math 201, right? So they look duplicated. So we have a student schedule for Jill, we have a student schedule for Lucas. So it looks like, okay, we store the data twice. And in a document store, and even if you were to store this JSON in Oracle database natively, which Oracle can do as well, that data would be duplicated. So if you ever had to change, the teacher for that math class, you would have to go through every document and update that. But if you use JSON relational duality views, because it's backed by relational tables, that data is actually only stored once, right, in a fully normalized version. And if you were to change the teacher, you only would have to do an update on one scheduled row. But for the documents, they get the information right away. And again, full asset and full consistency. So a huge benefit for any app over any kind of document store. If we hop to the next slide. So just to round up, the other important thing that people tend to forget is, like, we always talk about one JSON duality view, but you can have many JSON duality views on the same data, right? So it's like, if you think microservices or different applications, students want to have their student schedule. A teacher also want to have his or her schedule, but they probably don't care much about the students. They care more about which class to give and when, right? And then there's maybe a curriculum team that actually schedules these classes. So all of these want to have their structures without necessarily having all the information. So you can have multiple JSON duality views on the same tables. They really become like business objects on the same tables. And again, they never duplicate data, and they're always fully consistent because they're backed on the same relational tables. Okay, next slide, please. So that was JSON relational duality view. And I said, if you want to know more about it, you can hit me up later on. And Phil asked whether the REST APIs reside in ORDS. We do use ORDS for that. So that's the gateway through talking to the database, but actually the REST APIs are automatically generated. So you don't have to go in ORDS and create them yourself. They actually auto-registered with our auto-REST capabilities. Switching gears slightly, we still stay on JSON. We're talking now about JSON schema. So we're going now into the native JSON storage. I have a JSON document. I would like to store this JSON in the Oracle database or do something with it. JSON came out of the, we want flexible schema, schemaless, etc. All this good stuff that we talked about 10 years ago, the industry as a whole, right? Basically, it's like, oh, we want no schema, flexible schema. We just want to be able to store something. Well, fast forward 10 years later, probably everybody you on this call, it's like me, it's like, yeah, this was bound to happen. People go like, well, it would actually be nice to have some sort of a schema or know what JSON is in there, not just arbitrary stuff. And so the need for JSON schema came in. JSON schema is a well-known construct. It's literally, you can Google JSON schema. I think it's json-schema.org that we have adopted. So what that allows you to do is it allows you to define a schema of your JSON structure in JSON. Very similar to XML without all the actual overhead. The nice thing about Oracle databases, we give you a couple of different ways how to validate these schemas. So you can either on the left-hand side, what you see there, put the schema right on the JSON data type column that you would want it to be validated against. So you store the schema essentially on the column. It becomes somewhat like of a check constraint. You think like similar as you would have any kind of check constraint or not null constraint. Or you could also do this at runtime. You see in the middle here, you can actually select from a table which happens to have a JSON in this column called doc. And you will tell the database, okay, it's JSON to make sure that it's well-formed JSON, and then validate this new validate keyword with the JSON schema inside. So you can do JSON schema validation at runtime as well. And then on the right hand, you see we also have a new package called DBMS JSON schema that, among other things, allow you to give a validation report or get the validation report. So here we just say validate report. The column is doc. That's the, where the JSON data resides. The schema is another, in this case, a column where we stored the schema. So you get this flexibility. This could be a bind variable. This could be just a string literal, or you could store the schema in any table anywhere else as you like. And then the report will tell you, hey, actually, the validity of this document is not given. Valid is false. So there's an error. And in this case, it says, hey, actually, your ID attribute was supposed to be a number, but actually what you gave us was a string. So super powerful and a lot of flexibility there for you. We didn't kind of do the same thing that we did in the good old XMLDB days where we put this repository in place. Rather, we give you this capability at runtime and in any kind of way you want to validate. If we go to the next slide. Another marquee feature that has come into Oracle are domains. So some people call them SQL domains because we have domain names and service names, etc. But domains are a well-known construct in the SQL standard for a long time, but they're actually very limited from what's in there. So domain in the SQL standard today, what it kind of gives you is like a named check constraint that you could then apply across multiple tables. But the idea of domains is very simple. It's like, you know, databases have data types. So that's we have a varchar, we have a date, we have a number, we have a timestamp, what have you. But a database actually doesn't really know what the data means. So it's like if you have a credit card number or a social security number or a zip code, these are all stored as just number, right? The database tells you, well, this is a number, right? I know that, but it doesn't know that it's a zip code or a credit card number or a social security number. All of these have characteristics in their own, right? Zip codes can be only 5 digits long. If you go for the main zip codes, right, and they have all special meanings what the digits actually mean as well, and so forth, or same with phone numbers and so forth. Domains allow you to store and enforce that knowledge in the database. So it gives you this new type called create domain, give it a name, can tell it which data type it has to be, and then allows you to define certain check constraints or certain conditions on top of that. So if you look in the bottom of this of these two white bubbles, you see in this case we create a domain for email, which is a varchar 2. It has to be not null. If you use this domain, you know, there has to be an email, a string that you provide. And then email has a very well-known semantic. It has this @ symbol in the middle. Now, there's actually a lot of other things. It's like it needs a top-level domain at the end and so forth. But let's just focus, it needs this @ symbol, right? If you don't have this @ sign in there, it cannot be a valid email address. And in this case, we say, okay, we enforce that. We put this domain knowledge on top as a check constraint in this case. And then there's a couple of other things that you may want to say what you want to do with this data. So for example, if you want to display that domain, maybe you don't want to show anything that's before the @ sign, right? And if you order that by that domain, you want to probably order by the domain, order by that domain. If you want to order the email addresses, you want to probably order by the email domain name first, right? So that you have everybody from a company name together, like everybody from Target is under Target, everybody from AT&T is AT&T, and not just order by first name, right? And kind of get it completely random. So that is exactly what we do here on the bottom. And if you go to the next slide, what that allows you to do is you can then create tables and you can use these domains. So you see here in red, we have a customer table and we have actually 2 email addresses, right? We have a contact email and we have an invoice email. Could be the same, doesn't have to be. Now, there's 2 ways of how you can define a domain. If you kind of like just trust the domain definition, you know, this is what the data should look like. Somebody put this domain in place. You could do what we see in the bottom here, the invoice email space email. The domain, essentially, the domain name becomes a shorthand for the data type definition alongside with all the constraints and other stuff. But if you say, hey, you know, like I would like to have my email address enforced, I need this @ sign, you know, whatever the business rules are for the data, but I don't actually agree with the data type definition with varchar 2255, that may actually not be so long. You may actually have a longer email address. Then you can add that or overwrite that if you like, with the definition that you have here on top in contact email, where you say varchar 2 1000. So actually you would like to use 1000 and apply the domain email. So what will happen in this case is the database will enforce that the data type is correct. You cannot give us a number. You cannot give us a date because neither of those can contain an @ symbol. But it's like whether an email is only 10 characters long or 4,000 characters long actually does not matter for the semantics of whether it's a valid email address or not. So in this case here, we overwrite it. So it gives you the flexibility basically for somebody who goes like, gee, we thought that, you know, emails will never be longer as X or, you know, whatever it may be. And you guys, again, know this better than many of people out there. It's like as things go on, you go like, oh, we got that wrong. You can actually use this to basically, okay, make this wider, etc. And then, yeah, and at the bottom here, we see if we were to insert just random strings, right? No @ symbol. So we have a 2 times ABC here. We will basically get this check constraint violation that comes from the domain. So that's super powerful. There's a lot of things that come in domains and that you can do very smart things of. Also, it allows you to actually query the data dictionary and ask, okay, which of my columns in my entire scheme of 1,000 tables perhaps are actually email addresses or social security numbers or zip codes. And now it starts to become really interesting for analytics as well. But yeah, so it's a long topic. We could talk a whole hour on that. Let's go to the next slide. Super powerful concept though. Let's see what we got on the next one. There we go. Oh yeah, we got the
Yep.
domain display there. Yeah, this was
Yep.
just an example of what we said before, the display in the order. So let's just go to the next slide and to save some time. So, I mentioned once Keynote, so we put it in here again. So the future of data and app dev, one Loesa at Cloud World about a month and a half ago. So it talks about JSON relational duality, talks about AI, talks about property graphs, and a lot more things. So if you want to get a high level view of where we're going and you haven't seen this yet, definitely check out the Keynote. Said it's called the future of data and app dev. Let's go to the next slide. One other aspect we touch very briefly on, as we said, we have Abby doing a deep dive on that. Is also a key feature, though, is the operational property graphs, right? It's like actually having property graphs in the database. And notice is perfect. You see Cathye and I rehearsed this, so it's like perfect.
Exactly.
Cathye, go stay on the next slide. So it's like everybody of you probably knows property graphs, right? Or it's graph concept. So what it allows you to do is essentially this, right? You can write a lot less SQL to accomplish the same output. So what we have here is like, you want to find indirect bank account transfers from source to destination, right? So with middlemans in between. You could do this in SQL for a long, long time, but it's like, it looks like what you see on the right-hand side, a lot of SQL, right? It's like you could do this in a graph fashion with graph queries. Well, it's 4 lines, so super, super, super powerful as well. But again, we have more to come there. The graph thing is really something to watch out for. And I know that in this user group, you will hear a lot more about SQL property graph queries. So let's go to the next slide. I think this is, yes, we're handed over to Cathye. So there we go.
So I'm just going to go over a couple of analytic functions that are out there. Definitely there's more, so be sure and go out and check it. And I'll go over these fairly quickly because I can see where we are on time and make sure we get through this, get through everything else. But one of the things we have is the aggregation over the interval data type. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the interval data. You can go from day to second, or you can go for the time, or from dates. You can go from year to months. Interval type, which is a data type in a table. And before, you could always do the max and the min on that. But if you try to do an aggregate or a sum, an interval data type, it was producing an error. So now all this is saying is right here, you can now do this. And this is just all this little sections here. So we're doing the average duration. And you can see over here, average duration is 9 hours and 15 seconds for all 4 of those. So it is coming out. It's giving us what we want, and you're not getting errors. You could do the same with the sum. So just know that that's working for anybody out there using that data type and was running into issues. That's one thing that's fixed. And then this is something that I had not researched much in the past, but I did do some research over the weekend. I was kind of playing with it, working with it with my daughter, who's taking some analytic classes in college. So we started looking at this string matching SQL function. So you have your phonetic encode, which basically takes code, takes a code algorithms and builds the code based on how it sounds. And then it gives you can have it give from a maximum from 1 to 12 codes. It'll go as few as it needs to go. But you can also say, hey, I don't want to go past 5 codes. And if it does, it will cut it off at that point. And then you have your fuzzy match. And that's where you're comparing using different algorithms to compare one text string to the next. And it may come as a number, like from a number of how many changes is going to be to make them correct, or more like into a percentage of how close is it to being correct. So let's start with the phonetic encode. Here's just an example of it. You can see here, what I wanted to show is you have the double meta and the double metaphone alt. So if there is an alt text for it, it will provide that alt text. If not, it will just provide, it will put what's in the double metaphone. And then you can see here I have one that's 12 in length, and one that's 3 in length. So what I did was, you can see here for night and night, while they're spelt differently, they mean different things. They phonetically sound the same. So you can see that in 2 codes, NT, that's what it's bringing back for night. For Peter Pan, if you see here, I have 12 in the first 2, and coming back with giving me 5 codes for Peter Pan, because they're thinking that's the best to do it. But if I go and say 3, it's only going to bring me 3 back here. So it's going to say phonetically, but you said no more than 3, so we're going to max it out at 3, even though 5 may be better, maybe more descriptive. And then the Hulk is one that kind of brings up and says, hey, just know we have an alt as well. So it's TLK versus OLK. So those are just kind of showing the different things. And Barbie's thrown in there because my granddaughter was there and goes, well, why can't we do Barbie? So that one's just in there to make her happy. Okay. Then when we're talking about matching strings with a fuzzy match, I included this in here. I'm not going to go through all of these because I think this could be a session within itself, understanding these different things, but just know that there are different algorithms to check one text to another. And if you see here, this is a select statement that we did, and it's just kind of comparing these different text strings. And have things from the percentage of how's the longest string that they have in common. The longest common string here, it's sitting at, I would say, kind of like at 44, which is kind of roughly 44% of that is the length of that's correct. Or you also have things like how many steps is it going to take to make this change? And for like this kitten versus sitting, all you have to do is make one change the S to a K. And between these two, you'd have to make the 347 to 170. There's 3 changes there. And then as you get to the bottom, we have an extra I in all over here. So that means your 4 changes. So you can kind of see how you can pull this and get this information when you're matching strings using the different algorithms. And like I said, this could be a separate class within itself, a separate session within itself, kind of going through all of this. With that, we'll get on to some nice to knows and time savers, and I'll turn this back over to Gerald.
All right, thank you. So yeah, nice to know. So a couple of things that have come to 23C that are probably nice to know. So it's like, oh, gee, yeah, great, we can do this finally. So let's jump right in. If we go to the next slide here, schema level privileges. My security guys and I always kind of argue whether it's a security feature or an AppDev feature. I mean, it's in here, so I claim it's an AppDev feature. But really what it allows you to do is specifying privileges on schema level. So before 23C, what you had, if you wanted to grant access to your data, you would have one of 2 choices that you see there on the left, right? You either do grant select any table to the user HR, and therefore the user HR could access any table that's in the database. Or you could say grant select on these 5 tables that we have in here in production to HR. The trouble with that was always like, well, you never really want to grant select any table because, again, it's any table in the database. But if, your production schema were to have a new table added, you would have to go back and say, okay, which users have access to that schema, read access to that schema, okay, and now do grant select on this new table to that schema. Now, you could already for many, many years just use roles to do that, right? That would sort of be the correct way. If you were to ship an application, you would have a role that would have this read privileges on the schema. But more often than not, it would just be nice to be able to actually say, especially when it's not an application that you package up or whatever, to say, hey, look, these analytics guys need read access to that schema, okay? And that schema is maybe maintained by a couple of different teams. So I know there's not one team or whatever, or one application in place. So I just want to make sure that I can say, hey, for any table in that schema, the analytics guys, or let's say the HR guys here, have access to that, have read access to these tables. And you see you have now this new way of saying grant select any table on schema production to HR. And therefore, whenever you add another table to the schema production, HR will automatically have select privileges on that schema. So nice to know little thing. It's like it makes, especially also AppDev, a lot simpler because you don't basically have to worry about maintaining a role, updating a role, having forgotten to update a role, or like having to go back and see, hey, which users actually should have read access to the table. So if we go to the next slide. Another nice little thing, this is actually something that's in a SQL standard for quite a while. So I was like, why do we not have that? It's the capability to insert multiple rows in one insert statement. So what you see here on the left-hand side, you have insert into bookings, and then you have a values clause, and then you have actually 3 parentheses items with a comma at the end, and that will insert 3 different rows for you in one go, rather than having to do insert into bookings. Now, for this example, it doesn't look that cumbersome, but I'm sure many of you have had tables with like 200 columns, whatever, and copy pasting just always this insert into statement all to its entirety again, just to add another row, can be quite cumbersome. So this is actually called table value constructor, because in the SQL standard, the values clause in itself is an operator. It's called the value table, a table value constructor. And so you can use this also to generate rows. So you see this on the right-hand side. So you can actually say select star from values. And then you say, hey, give me quickly 3 rows, right? 1, 2, 3 with James, Scott, James, John. And then you have to obviously tell us what should we name these 2 columns of these 3 rows. So this is where you have afterwards this parentheses, employee ID and first name. And then boom, here you have your data generated. Super handy. I know you can do a connect by for many, many years, but this would actually be the ANSI SQL or ISO SQL equivalent of generating rows. So nice to have, nice to know. If we go to the next slide. There's a couple of other ways how you could use this. So again, you could also use this in a with clause, for example, for recursive queries. And the one thing is we will actually tell you when this value clause has been used. So under the covers, this is something that basically just executes a select union all, sort of the same code path, the same C code is used. But we still didn't want to confuse you guys by kind of clustering their union all in the explain plan. So therefore you have this new execution plan operation called value scan. And also you will see on the bottom then of what has actually been used, right? We have 3 tuples with 3 elements in this case here. And that tells you, hey, this values clause has been used in that select statement. Go to the next slide. The annotation. So this is something that I'm very fond of personally. So an annotation is essentially what you can do now is you can annotate your data model with these annotations. And this is just a SQL syntax to use. If we go straight to the next slide, I think this is a little bit more clearer, or it gets clearer. So like for any object that you have in a database, or for almost any object that you have in a database, certainly like tables and views, indexes, etc., you can specify annotations. And these annotations are key value pairs with an optional value. They're just strings. It's literally like basically park the metadata next to the data. So you have a table customers here, and then the application, or you as the user or DBA, or all 3 of you can decide, okay, in this case, I have 3 annotations there. Okay, there's a sensitivity. Well, we have like low, medium, high. So sensitivity, space, high. Departments, which departments does this table belong to, or should have access to, or own it, or whatever? Well, department, sales, comma, delivery. So comma separated list. Again, it's just a string. This could be a JSON object. This could be anything else. Or often you actually don't need necessarily a value for it. So for example, you say, for whom is this for? Well, for the front office. Well, okay, for the key itself is deterministic, or is unique in the case that the application can give me all the tables that are for front office. They don't need to necessarily have a value. Now, if you go to the next slide, you can also repeat this on columns, right? So you can also say, hey, look, here we have in this employee table, the ID, we have annotations in there. And for there as well, the first thing is, well, it gets an annotation of identity. I just need to know that this is an identity. I don't need any value for that. So this is good enough for me to query, or which are my columns in my entire schema of 1,000 tables that are classified as identity. You can do that now because you annotated it. Now, sorry if you just stay on that slide for a little bit longer.
Sorry.
And then, no worries. And then, again, you can do key value pairs. So like display is a common thing, right? It's like, okay, it's called ID name salary, but we want this actually as an employee ID, employee name salary. The application can start looking for these things and then interpret these things, right? And so you see also on the salary at the bottom, you have another one that says UI hidden. Now, the important thing about annotations is like, so we had domains before, right? Where you put the semantics into the database, right? And tell it exactly what to do or not. Annotations are sort of like a parking lot for metadata for the user. Database does nothing with it, right? They're just key value pair strings. Whether the value is, so key has to be a string, a name, or basically an identifier, but whether the value is a comma separated list, a JSON object, or whatever else is completely up to you. And the idea here is that users and applications start sharing a common set of annotations and they start interpreting these so that you can say UI hidden, and any application that goes into that schema goes like, hey, this is an annotation on UI hidden, so it will not display it. So this can become very, very powerful by sharing metadata alongside with your data by storing it directly next to it. Okay, if we hop to the next slide now, to switch gears here a bit, Boolean data type, probably don't have to say much more other than, yes, it's finally here. You can have Boolean now, so all good. Next slide. Select without from, something that is kind of a little nice to know, time saver, etc. You wouldn't believe how many times people get a little bit like, wow, select sysdate from dual, from dual, from dual. There's technically no reason that you would have to specify a table if you just have an expression that evaluates in itself, meaning that there's no column name from the table that you select from, right? So sysdate is a function, you have another function. Why have this from dual there all the time? Now, oddly enough, in the SQL standard, you do need the from clause, but for type saving purposes, we made the from dual optional. And literally what will happen if we don't find a from clause, we will just attach from dual. That's literally all will happen. So if you kind of were to have a comma there at the end and then a semicolon, right, it will give you a random error saying, hey, there's a missing expression, etc. We will just attach from dual and then run the query for you, and whether the query is valid or not, that's what you get. But it's a little nice to know, it's like, especially when you type a lot of SQL ad hoc. Next one. Yeah, 4096 columns. So table can now have 4096 columns. If you wish to do so, there's a new parameter that guides this max columns. You will have to set it to extended. And of course, for that parameter to be set, your compatibility parameter has to be set to 23C. So that helps if you have ultra-wide tables, denormalized tables, etc. Next slide. The developer role, we've packed everything that an application developer needs to build an application into a new role called DB developer role. That has been sanctioned by our security guys. So it's a complete secure role. The idea here being like, there's way too many developers that go just grant me DBA or, the any privileges so that I can create a table, etc. We had resource for a while, but there's a couple of other privileges that are involved or that as a developer you may want to use, such as, being able to run explain plans, get your stats, etc. So those are kind of some $V views that you need to select and. So all of that is packed into this DB developer role. You can have a look in what's actually in there. But the idea here being, if you have a new developer coming on board, and it's like, hey, I need privileges to do something with my schema, create a table, insert some rows, etc. That's the one role that you grant them now. So grant DB developer role to the user and they're good to go. Obviously, never really grant this in production because it's a developer role. All right, next slide. And then, oh yeah, so here's a list of all the stuff that's in there. I said you can look in the documentation as well. So let's just skip this in interest of time. There's the other resources that we have. So hop to the next slide. And then the returning clause. So the returning clause got now old and new. So by default, prior to 23C, the returning clause only gave you the new values back. So, you did an insert into an update, whatever, you got the new value back. But actually, sometimes it would be quite nice to also know what the change happened, what the change was that happened. Because if you look at these update statement here on the bottom left-hand side, you kind of say, hey, employees that live in Austria, they all get like twice the salary, right? But you actually never knew what the actual salary was to begin with, right? So it's like, so the application to answer this question, they would have to select all this first, right? Give me all the salaries from employees in Austria, right? So then I store my old salaries and then do the update and then perhaps do another select, salary from all employees in Austria to get the new salary and actually know the differences. Well, now you no longer have to do this. You can just execute your update as you always would and say returning old salary and new salary into bind variables. And with this one operation and one network round trip, you will get the information back of what was the previous value and the new value, right? And that can be very, very, very helpful for applications that are, for example, curious in what was the delta of the change, right? Or what will the change look like if we were to go through there, because we haven't committed this either yet, right? We could always roll back. Okay, next slide. That's where we hand it back to Cathye. So take us home, Cathye.
And so we just have a few that are more some of the time savers, although I will say some of the ones that Gerald mentioned are also, I think, time savers as well. So, I'm going to go by this fairly quickly because I think we're over on time a little bit. But one of the things that I think is helpful is you can now group by alias and position. So where in the past when you did a group by and when you come talk about alias, group by and having, anytime you did that, you'd have to put in group by and the long expression. This one isn't that long, but you just can imagine when you have longer column calculations. Oops, sorry, longer column calculations. And then when you do that, and then you have to change them. And if you make a change to one, you have to change it in 3 places now. That's the way we had to do it in the past. Now you can just use hired year. So you put hired year here, hired year there. If you make a change here, you only make it one place and you don't have something really long. And in addition to that, you can also like order by the column number or the column position. So if you have a column 1, sort by column 1, you can now group by that column position as well. So you could just do a group by 1 here. So that's something that I think is going to be very helpful going forward. Again, you can now do direct joins and updates and deletes. So you can see here where we're doing an update and we're going to make this the employee salaries. We're going to make them employee salaries times 2, where the department is development. So we're having to pull from the department table. In the past, you had to do a select clause where you would do this and you'd say where, select, department, ID is in, select department, the long select clause on the where. It's harder to read. This is, I think, much easier to read, much easier to code. So that's helpful. And it's a very similar thing as well as to the delete. You can delete from employees table. If you do from a department's D, where the department equals department. And again, on the where clause, we're not having to put a long select statement in there. So these are getting things I think are going to save us some time when we're doing our coding, or at least save me time. If not exist, before you'd have to go check and see if it existed and put this. If it doesn't exist, then you can go ahead and create the table. Now you can just put in the create table, just put if not exist in there, which again, I think this is going to save us some time. It's also nice to know, but it's also going to save us some time when we're coding, that we don't have to check and see if it exists before we create our drop tables. Okay. And this one, this is something that I wasn't as familiar with because I always used the pipes. I came in from an OLAP background, so I started using SQL, and everybody always said, just do those double pipes to when you concatenate stuff. And I thought, really, they don't have, didn't know why we didn't do concatenate, just use this function. I didn't realize that you had to nest them before. And this to me is something like, oh, wow, it's like something simple. So now where you used to have to, could only concatenate 2 strings, and then you have to create another concatenation to concatenate the 2 strings you just did, get that nested. That can get very lengthy. Now you can just do it. It can concatenate multiple strings. So you can see here, now you can do that. To me, that's really something that's probably going to save time, create errors, and not have to worry about counting your open and closed parens. You can set a default on an update or insert statement. So this is where I know I would have used this a lot when we're creating a field can't be null, and we may want to give it a value of a default value that's going to be doesn't exist or whatever for hierarchies or whatever you may want to do. But before, you'd write the code in the ETL to do that when you loaded the data. Now you can just say, here we have this description, and the default this will be, if you have an insert or update, the default will be, in this case, we'll make it banana. You can do it for insert, you can do it for update, you can do it for both. So you can see here, you're putting null values in there, and there we go. It's going to come up and display as ends. Okay. So now this is something that I want to challenge you guys with. this is, Oracle has a Oracle 23C free database out there. It's not large. It's got 12 gigabytes of user data storage and 2 gigs of RAM. It's not meant for production. It has a sample schema and tables in there, so it's ready to use. You can go in. I will tell you, I took the steps. I downloaded the image. I installed the image. I followed the instructions, and within an hour, because they had the schema, login, everything there, I was writing SQL statements in this new environment. So it's not a lot of time to invest in it, but it gives you an opportunity to not only check these functions, check what we've talked about today, but also go in and look and see what else is out there. With that, I think we're done. Here's some other free resources, and we would open it up for any questions that we have.
Well, I'm happy to say that we have we've got one left. Since this is for developers, it would be great if you used Oracle Linux Cloud. It's more of a comment. Oracle Linux Cloud Developer image. So that was from Phil Canata.
Okay.
So I think we are at top, but testament to the interest of your presentation, the brunt of our attendees are still on. And I just want to thank you again. It's been very informative. 23C is going to be a real step up. I mean, well, is a real step up. And thank you very much for presenting to us today, Cathye and Gerald. Hopefully we'll see you on again soon. I think, I think you're right. There are a number of different topics that could spawn separate presentations from within this. So anyway, thank you once again.
There's one more question about the PDF, sorry.
Oh, there we are. Yeah, carry on. Yes, the PDF will be put on the archive as well. The PDF and the recording will all be made available on the archive. The recording will be made available not just on our TechCast area of the AnDOUC.org website, but also on YouTube. So yeah, look out for that. You can get your fingers on all of it. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Cathye and Gerald. Appreciate you coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good rest of your day and week. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.